So the server is now ready to receive requests from the client for getting the user's settings as well as altering the settings. So in this video, we are going to first get those settings from the server, the real settings, live in the settings page and refresh them every time the settings page changes, as well as taking a look at a few bugs and cleaning up some code. So let's get to it. So we'll start by opening the Facetto Word WPF application, and we're going to go to the settings page. First, we're going to make sure things build now because we've edited the server and we've also edited the core project. So we're going to make sure things build. Then we're going to look at the settings page specifically and get it so that it pulls live information from the server every time you enter the settings page. And then take a look at the actual Sqlite client database to see that the settings are getting commit and pulled back and forward correctly. And then once we've done that, we can look at editing those settings. But let's start with the, pulling and pushing the basic settings information first. So we'll start by opening the Facetto Word project, and let's just first see if this thing actually builds. So all bar one error, login result API model. So we renamed that to what was it? User profile details API model, I believe. So is that all we need to build successful? One more. Oh, not one more. Now Foddy's simply complaining. Okay, so now that's probably just from the lack of update. So we right click on the solution, manage NuGet packages. Okay, that's another random bug. Okay, let's do one at a time. Right click, manage NuGet packages. Okay, something's gone messed up with NuGet. Let's just restart this project. In the meantime, actually, as well, now that's just popped up, it reminded me, you can go ahead and download and install this SQL Server Compact Sqlite Toolbox. So if you just Google for this, you'll get to this page here. Download and install that, and then once we come to look at the database that's on this actual machine, the client database, the Sqlite database, we'll be able to use SQL Management Studio to view and edit that database. So if you go and install that now, and then let me have a look at what's going on with this NuGet. Hopefully just need to restart the solution. I've got a feeling it's simply messed up. This also looks like it's all Visual Studio is actually messed up a little bit here because it's all the resolution's all bitty, but I won't worry too much about that for now. So restarting's fixed that. So we now go to update. We can select all and update, and everything in here I believe should update, no problem. And one more, we've got, I guess, consolidate Foddy. That might work itself out in a minute. There we go. So we're all up to date now. So the only thing is, as I mentioned, it does seem to be the text is a little bit bitty. Let me just try and turn off my presentation mode, turn it back on. Let's just restart this once more because that shouldn't be bitty. I'm not sure why that's bitty. So I just had to turn my second monitor off, restart Visual Studio, and then the blurry text went away. I think Windows 10's got some issues with two monitors with different scaling resolutions. So that's us going now. We've got the solution building, I presume. There we go, building successful. You guys will have installed the Sqlite server tool. So now let's just press F5 first to make sure this solution still works. Now we've updated obviously the server and the core and all the packages. So we've got here just test signing in, which is a real sign in. So actually this should fail and crash because the server isn't running, which is correct. So if I just spin up an instance of the server for a minute so we can actually log in. So just open the Facetto Word web server solution if you want to obviously run live with this as well. So I've just got this here. I'll just move it off to another screen in a second. You can see how this text is blurry because I've opened it with both monitors open, and this one isn't. So I don't know if you can tell that with your screen, but you should be able to quite clearly. Windows 10 bug for you. Right, so this is the server. Let's just press F5, run this, then I'll move this off to the other screen and just leave it running in the background. We shouldn't really need to worry too much about this. It should just run and work. So that's the website up and running. There we go. Okay, so I'll move that off down to this other screen, just minimize it for now. And we'll start the WPF application up once more. And then we'll go to login. And now we're logged in. So now if we go to settings, we've got the same issue with the this application. See how it's all blurry? This is clearly just this issue with the second monitor for some reason. You just have to bear with that for this video. Okay, so I've hopefully fixed the blurry issue now. I just set this as the main monitor and just drag the start menu down below so you don't see the start menu everywhere. So now we are signed in. This is now no longer blurry, which is nice. We have the settings page. So right now the settings page doesn't actually, give me 1 second, doesn't actually load more than once. So if we were to look at view model settings, which is just the settings view model, and the part where the data loads and binds is this name username thing here. So if we look at the references, there's only 3 references. One is in the handle successful login, so once we've logged in it loads. The other is the application setup, which is the start of the whole application. And then that's it. The other one is the actual load command that you bind to. And the load command is not used anywhere right now. So the settings view model will only update when we load or log in. So in order to now see this and first fix this to make sure this is showing the right information, we want to install that SQL server tool that we had, the one in the screenshot, the Sqlite Toolbox. And then we want to go ahead and open up SQL Management Studio. So that's just loading at the minute. And then once you have that tool installed, you will have in view, you should have the Sqlite SQ Server Compact Toolbox. So in here then now, you can see I've got one here. If I just delete that or right click, remove connection. So this is what you'll be seeing. And if you click on this add connection, you will now, so that's popped up on the wrong window again. Where is the bar? There we go. Click browse. And go to the actual bin debug folder of Facetto Word, so where this application is, and you can get the Facetto Word DB file. And then test connection, successful, so that's it. Nope, I should have maybe clicked save on that. Let's do that once more. Facetto Word, test connection, okay. Then I guess just close. There we go. So now we have the database. So if we right click on the login credentials and say edit the top ones, we can see here I have a name test1. That's because I've actually played with this to chuck a value in to see that it loads. So if we wanted to edit this, right click, new query, and let's do update login credentials, set first name equals Luke, and we've only got one, so I'm just going to run that as is. And you can't really see here because it's all black on black. But it says what it says. It says 1 row affected down here. So if now we go to the Facetto Word application, the WPF, and we load up, we'll see that this will load up, and it should say now in settings Luke. Now this is the local database. That's not technically correct for one, but it's showing Luke. If we jump back to here and change it to say Luke 2 and run, and then we go back to here, you can see it just says Luke. It's not going to change. Now, if we restart the application or log out and log in, it'll change, but it's not updated here. So what we want to do is every time we come to the settings page first, we want it to be pulled from the database to make sure we have the up-to-date values. So let's start by first doing that. So let's just stop this. And actually, the other thing I noticed as we're doing this, or just before, is we never finished the logout of the wherever logout was. Was it in settings view model? And no, it's not been done. I remember putting a note. Here we go. To confirm they want to log out. We won't do that yet. Clear any user cache. So here, we want to really clear the cache. So that would be the client data store. And now get login credentials, has credentials, save credentials. So we don't have a function yet. So we'll go into this interface and we'll add one that says task clear all login credentials async. And this will simply remove all login credentials stored in the data store. And then we need to implement that. So we have the base client data store. There we go. Control dot implement interface, and it's chucked at the bottom of here, I'm guessing. Yep. We'll copy and paste this summary just because I don't like to see blank comments. And then in here now, all we need to do is do mdb context.login credentials dot remove range, remove all as an enumerable. So I guess we could do mdb context dot login credentials dot. I could have sworn there was a clear or an empty, but maybe not. No, maybe not. Predicates or predicate. No, we don't want that. Or shall we just remove the actual list itself? That should work. Not overly convinced, but I'm surprised the mind you, it is only I guess a DB set. I'm surprised the DB set doesn't have a remove all, but I guess that's fine. That'll work. So, in fact, yeah, it will work for now. We should probably start locking these calls over time so that the client data store can only execute one of these things at a time. But for now, it's good enough. It'll work. So we basically just await. Oh, that doesn't need a waiting, sorry. Remove all entries from login credentials table, or just login credentials, save changes, await mdb context.save changes async, and that should be all we have to do. Yeah, we did clear all entries the same up here, so let's keep the comment the same, clear all entries. So now we can do clear all login entries here, and we can just await that. Now the log out is a relay command, so now it's asynchronous. We can do async await logout, and we can change the logout to a task and an async. Then we'll have to rename it to logout async to match our naming convention. And then this should actually now clear the information for once. So that should be one thing fixed off the list of things we wanted to fix. So let's just spin up the application. We should be logged in. And then if it acts the same as it did before, we'd always be logged in then. The logout would simply take us back to the page. So now, if we log out, it should have wiped it from the database. We can also check that. If we go to here and just do select all from login credentials, select the text and run, you can see no rows. So there is no login credentials, which is good. And to confirm, if we restart the application, if we jump back to here, restart, then we should stay on the logout screen. So that's now working. So the logout's done, which is good. So next on the list, we want to, there's one other bug as well. We will get back to what we want, but I'll make a note of, some of the things I wanted to fix that have been kind of long outstanding bugs. Another one is the view model locator thing. Where did we put that? Is it called view model locator? Yeah, view model locator, which is in WPF view models. So here, the issue I've noticed here, I've noticed it for a long while, I just keep forgetting to fix it. The instance should be static, but then once you get the instance, these shouldn't be static. These actual view models that you're after are instances on the view model locator class itself. So when you do instance, you can get these off that. So even though it works, that's kind of a bug, and you'll maybe have seen that error in XAML sometimes, complaining about it not being able to find application view model or find settings view. So that's a small bug I just wanted to get out of the way. So let's now go over to we're in the settings view model. So what we want to fix is, this load wants to load from the local database, which is this, and then load from the real server. So first we'll cut all the code in load, and we'll do an await, and we'll call it update values from store async, or from local store, say. And we will just generate that for the minute, paste this code back in. This can be a private helper, loads the settings from the local data store and binds them to this view model. Cut all that, go out of here. Have we not wrapped these in a region yet? No. So we should also clean this view model up a little bit because it's getting quite big. So these are command methods. Open, close, log out, clear data user, load, save username. So all that's there. And then we'll have another one, private methods. Private helper methods in this case. And paste that back down there. That will have an async. So now we can call update values from local store. That pulls it in from the local database and binds to all the values, which is fine. Then, yeah, commit action. Yes, that's fine. So that'll bind every time we update. I'm just thinking, actually, in theory, we don't need to do a new name, a new thing every single time. All we need to do is actually update the original text each time. So it could be a little bit more efficient, actually. We could cut that out. We could make sure that, the only thing is we'd have to make sure that it's been loaded once before we do update local values, which we will. So this will be create, and in that case, actually, the original value will be nothing. So, or in fact, this is where the original value could be the loading values. It could actually say loading, or it could just say ... So let's just say set initial unloaded values. And then we're going to copy and paste this all back in, just so I can delete the bits out. Load the stores, and now we don't need to do that. We just do name dot original value equals that. So it's a little bit more efficient because you're not recreating the object every time when all you want to do is change the value. So username dot equals that. I'll comment these in a moment. So in fact, there's nothing to load from the password because nothing changes there. And then the email is email.original is that. So set name, set username, set email. So that now updates the values. So if we go back to here, this now can be our loading values, which I think should be ... maybe. In fact, we could do loading text. The text to show while loading, which we probably won't ever see. We'll probably put a little delay in here just so you can see it. So as a temporary thing, we'll do await task.delay 2 seconds just so you can see it happening, and then we'll remove. So this would be loading text, save password doesn't matter, and loading text. So now when we load, we'd have loading text, and this would actually happen every time we were loading. So to be honest, we probably don't want to do that if we've already run this. And again, actually, this maybe only wants to happen once. So we want a little boolean in here, region private members, and a private boolean loaded once. A flag indicating if we have loaded any values since being created. So loaded once, and the reason for this is once you very first initialize, you've got no data. As soon as you've got data, there's no point showing the ... So in fact, we might not ever see this because as soon as we open the application, stuff loads. So we might simply want to just chuck a really big delay in here, or temporarily disable the load just so you can see that happening maybe. Yeah, so we'll see. But the point is that when your application starts this load, so we'll probably have to put, like, say, a 5-second delay there to get there in time. And also when the application loads, it will call load. This will wait for 5 seconds, and when we show the settings page, it will call load again. So we probably want to simply, again in future, because this wouldn't typically be the delay, in future only have one run of this. So if it's already running, it gets ignored because it's already in the process of running. But for now, we will just do it this way. Again, it's something we'll improve on in the future, but it's not going to harm for now. So the loading will do the ... then if m loaded once. So if we haven't loaded before, if we haven't loaded before, and in fact, saying that, we wouldn't need if we'd loaded before because name would be null. So we don't need to kind of keep track of this. Just cut that out. We'll do it instead based on the actual fact of if name is null. So if name equals null, so if we haven't created name yet, then we set it up. And then we'll do the same for username, password, and email. So we have username, password, and we could actually, instead of these being in there, in fact, yeah, this is stupid logic. Why am I doing that? I'm making that way more complicated than it needs to be. These just go in the constructor now because there's nothing that we're actually pulling from anywhere, so they can just be straight in the constructor. Sometimes the obvious is not so obvious to me. So go into the constructor, do all that lot, create name, go into the load. This has been a lot of back and forward, never mind. It's always fun. So now create name, username, password, email. So that's them created, create the commands, and then localization stuff to do. So now we have a constructor that sets it up, and a load that when we call load will simply for now delay 5 seconds just so we can see the old values in there, the ... Then we update it from the local database. And then this will be a to-do load from server. Right, so let's just check this still runs the same now. And let's also see if we can get from the initial opening of the application into the settings and then see that update. So, load async now waits 5 seconds before loading now, I think, because we await that on, in fact, that's probably, we don't want to do that. So when we open the application, we load here, but we're waiting. So in order to, before the application even appears on screen, we're loading synchronously. The same as the database, to be honest, these two things, this I can understand, we can't do much without the data store, but the load new settings we don't want to wait for, because that's just loading new settings. And we can't really just do that, because then where are the errors going to go? So instead we can use the, do we have any dependency injection shortcuts to the task, which should be in core actually? Yeah, task manager. So we have core DI, task manager. So we were to do using static core DI. Then in here we could do task manager.run, and this now would capture any errors in the task itself. But then we await that, and obviously we have we can do that, I believe now. But then what we need is when we actually don't want to do anything after the fact. So in this case, this is simply load, but once it's loaded, we don't really need to do anything. So in the task manager, we want to have sort of a fire and forget, and we'll add these as we need them. So this is a kind of task run and ignore. It's not so much ignore, it's run and forget. And we'll do a function of a task of, well, we could actually do them all, but we don't really want to see them all done in this video. So I'll do the one we need, and then outside the video I will do all the others, so that all I'm doing is basically I'm going to copy this one, which I could have just done, could have just copy and pasted that like that, and change it to run and forget. And then you can copy the comments because it's exactly the same. Queues a specified work to run a thread pool and returns a proxy for the task returned by the function. So that is actually the definition of the run from the underlying task.run. So that's a Microsoft comment, if you will. Then this one, in really its remarks, I'd say, is the only thing we need to add. So I'd add in the remarks that this won't be a task, this will be a void. The past in task cannot be awaited, as it is to be run and forgotten. Then any errors thrown will get logged to the iLogger in the DI provider. So really all we're going to do is copy and paste this function, insert the remarks, change it to a void and rename it to and forget. And we'll do that for everyone, but I'll say, you know, not in this video. I'll just like kind of pause and do all them at the end. You don't really need to see them. And then we'd have to go to base task manager and we just have to implement the same ones. So this would be now chucked at the bottom, and we can move it to, again, a region. I'll tidy this up. So we've got task methods, and then I'd probably put all the runs in one and then the runs and forgets in another, or I'll just put them one after the other. So we see that it's this one, then the run and forget. And all that will do is call the run method, and we pass in the function origin file path line number, basically all your included things. And then now this is still going to complain void async void, and we await. And there we now have a way to effectively await a task, but that the caller can't await, which is typically not what you want to do. But because our function does nothing more than try and catch instantly wraps, it can never really miss any exception, which is the concern of not awaiting a task. So it kind of bypasses that concern, but there's very few cases where you want to do run and forget. This is actually one of them. So that should hopefully be the one that we want, and I can just do run and forget, and there we go. So now what that means is that this task will queue up the load async, but if that was to fail for any reason, everything will keep going, but our logger, which means in this case our file, our log.txt and our console, would get logged of any issues, but that's it. That's the only place you'd see them. But in this specific scenario on load, when it opens, that's kind of all I want to do. So that works for me. So now when we start the application, we should have it showing up straight away. We're not logged in, unfortunately. And then this will load and 5 seconds later change. So I'm not going to be able to sign in that quick. So I'm just going to sign in this time. And I'm then going to kill the application. Oh, of course. Oh yeah, the server is running. There we go. So I'm now logged in. We've got the info, it's there. But if I now restart, we should be logged in straight away. And I'll have 5 seconds to get to the settings page to see the ... hopefully. Now 5 seconds later, boom, it pulls the data in. So, in fact, did that? I missed that. Oops, don't know what I've clicked there. We can have this, we can have the spinner going. So we don't have the spinner to show loading, which we could do because when we've created them, we've got a property on here now that has the one we made in the last video. So working. Now, when does working get set to full? So basically, whenever we save, the working gets flagged and then stops. And nah, we'll leave that off for now. I'm just thinking the working kind of shows, but this is the working's more for a live edit we've done, not for simply something loading. So that I'm happy with now. So that settings will work and does show that. So what we want to do is to call this load now every time the settings menu visible changes to true. So if we go to application view model, and in the settings menu visible, which is set to false by default, we will do get, which will return side menu. Sorry, not side menu. What am I doing? Settings menu we want. Settings menu visible. We'll now do settings menu visible, and we will just copy that. Region private members, and that will be private booleans. This is just a backing field that we have to create now that we're not using an auto property. Then this can be public properties. Don't know why we haven't got a region here. I think it's because there's only public. Oh no, we just don't have a region for some reason. So there's the region set. Now in the setter, we want to do the typical thing, which is value. Settings menu visible equals value. So that is set the backing property, or rather the backing field. If property has not changed, so if settings equals a value, ignore. So do nothing if it hasn't changed. Then if the settings menu is now visible, so if value, so value is true, basically if the new value is true, we can actually set the backing one first. If the new value is true, reload settings, and we we want the view model settings dot load async, and we want to do the task manager, which we don't have in the using namespace. So this is using static seto.word.core.di task manager dot run and forget, and we run the load. So now what that should do is every single time we show the settings menu, the load should get called. So if we hit this, when we first open the application, it should hit this. Which it does. And then we'll just wait 5 seconds because, just because as soon as I click this button, we should see it hit again. So now if I click the settings, you can see it's going to load. So 5 seconds later for now, because it's a delay, this would then update with the real values. And when we hide, it doesn't get fired. When we show, it gets fired again. So now, if we leave that 5 second delay in just to visibly see, what this should mean is if we jump back to this database and we update the first name to say Peter, and then we run that. Now the first name is Peter, and it says test1. But if we hide the menu and pull it back up, 5 seconds later, this should change to Peter. Or not. Oh, I know now the other issue. So, for one, well, I think I know the issue. When we do this, it's obviously hitting. So it is doing that. 5 seconds later, we are calling the update values from the data store. So this is saying to get. And those values are still saying test1. Now, the reason for that is if you go to get credentials and you see the implementation, which is here, it gets the DB context first or default. The DB context, as we see here, and the iClient have all come from, if I'm not mistaken, this extension method. Nope, not that one. Which extension method is it? Or is it that one? UI file task. No. Oh, it's a relational one, obviously. We're all about the relational stuff. So the framework construction extension in the relational add client data store. This adds a DB context, which by default, if you look here, the context lifetime is scoped because typically in a ASP.NET Core website where this is used, the environment is a scoped environment. So every time you create a constructor, it's in a scope. Our WPF application right now isn't scoped. So if you call a scoped service from the dependency injection provider and you're not in a scope, you'll get the same instance because it's a null scope, which is classed as the same thing. So what we want to do is we want to change this context that's added to be a transient service. So every single time we ask for the database context, it's a new version. And the reason for that is you can think of a database context like an open SQL connection. So once we've loaded the client data store on application startup, that information is then loaded into memory and it's never going to hit the database up again for new information until, you know, the next time it's created or you forcefully load. And instead, we want to, you know, update it all the time. And the reason this works in ASP.NET Core is, as I mentioned, every single time you hit up a controller, the controller's recreated every single call, which means the database context is recreated every call. In this instance, our application starts up and stays alive. So we want to change the context lifetime to transient. And we also, this is the thing we actually access as the client data store. We have added this as scoped right now, so we want to add this as transient. So this will be created new every time. And then in its creation, it asks for the data store, so that will be created new every time. So with that little tweak, hopefully now when we hit this, it should load the new settings. So now if we restart, we have a 5 second delay, and then so from the first load we'll have a 5 second delay and this thing will hit and update. So we know this works. And the first one will now say Peter, I presume, and then we'll wait 5 seconds and it'll reload, but it's already Peter, so we need to change it. So we just go back to here now and change it to back to Luke, say, and run that query. And then we jump back into Word application. So now if we hide and show again, this time 5 seconds later it should update with the database, the new database info. So there we go. So now we have live pulling from the database whenever the settings menu is shown. So let's just go down. Where is it? Load. Let's just remove that delay because we're done with that. Update values, and let's just run again to see it kind of more realistic where it's instantaneous. So the application starts, the data's there, it says Luke. I change this to Luke 2 and run. And then we go back to here, simply close and reopen. It already says Luke 2, so it's like nice and instant. So now we know that and this goes for all of them, username, password, email, all the stored credentials, which are here, which again you can't see because my screen's all black and I haven't bothered changing the settings of this. Maybe I can just change them in here for appearance. It doesn't give me any UI. There's probably a setting somewhere I can change this. I'll do that for future videos. But basically it gives me all the info, the username, and this is purely the offline, the client's values, so what we think is on the server. So the next step is to actually pull the real information from the server and synchronize it back. So to do that, if we find out where we already do the post async, just to be slightly lazy, let's just copy and paste this. Then, yeah, we remember the rest of that result.display error failed. Okay, so in here, load from server. And again, this is something we'll clean up in probably one of the very next videos to move these routes into some kind of route provider that we inject into dependency injection. Until then, we'll just type the few for now. So this is now load user profile details from server, update local cached values, then post async. We are expecting back in fact that's the right model already, the user profile details API model, which contains those bits of info. So that's already correct. The route, which actually we did not set, so this is a slight tweak on the ASP.NET Core side that isn't in the ASP.NET Core video, but I'm sure you guys watch both to keep in sync, and I'll try and mention it on the next video. Let's just stop the server and let's just chuck in an actual route. So we have the get user profile async. We want to do a route, which we will do as, again, these will all go into a route provider, so they share them. For now, I'll just do, say, API/user/profile to get the profile. And for the update, we'll do /update. And that's it. So they're the two routes now we are expecting to hit. Just spin that web server back up. Let that spin up, and that's all good. Yes, we know that's going to load. Copy this off, and just minimize that again. So now the route that we want to hit is this, and we don't pass anything in. And so that is that. Now, if we call this, it will fail right now because we haven't passed any credentials in. This is a authorized call that the server is expecting the token or some kind of authentication, so this will fail. But let's just leave it as fail first to see what happens if it does fail. So first, if it was successful, so if result.successful, then store this new or save the new information in the data store. And to do that, we already have save login credentials somewhere. So we have it there. That's the call. That's the definition. We only do it one other place on handle successful login. Well, that's very specific to handling a successful login because you load the data again and then you go to here. So we just want this bit where we save the credentials. and we can call that, but the bit we don't want to keep repeating ourselves on is this, to recreate it from a user profile details API model. So because this is a API model in core and the data models in core that we expect, we can just simply add a public, then login credentials data model, and this is something that you can get things for that do this kind of thing where they purposely map data over. But for now, again, don't make things too complicated until they need to be. This is just going to be a nice little helper. So public helpers or public helper methods, and create a new login credentials data model from this model, and that can be cut of that. Then we can say now login result dot to login data model, like so, and then in here just paste that in, and we want to return that. So return a new model, and this is simply our actual values. So for now, that is good enough. That's fine. The token is, yeah, whatever already is in there. Login credentials, data model to go to the database. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just thinking of this token will always be available, but it will and should be. Right, so if we now do this exact call in, where are we now? Base client, settings view model. So here, save the new information into the data store is now simply this, and it's the result dot server response dot response. So it seems like a long call. So that is, we can get the, just to split that down, it's a bit of a long line, so you can see it easier. We do that. Create data model from the result or from the response. Save the new information to the data store. And then finally, if we have done that, update the local values. So this is kind of where you start seeing the bridge between view models and data models. And in fact, let me just think on this and kind of give you a little description of this. So this is one of the questions that people have started asking in advance of this video before, you know, I've done this video. And that's kind of where, once they have view models and they load information and they do things, and you've got the back-end data models, and then you've also got this little bit of logic in between, like converting view models to data models. And people start to ask, like, where does that belong? Where do you pull from the database and put into the view model and things like that? So really the answer, I guess the technical answer is the view model should always be relative to the view that you are creating the model for. So if you've got a view model that's generic between iOS, Android, Windows, your whole application, all the logic in there should be relative to all of those. If it's only relative to desktop applications and you create a different view model for mobile applications, then again, all the logic in each of those view models should be relative to the view or the UI that it's created for. So what that means is if we're doing any kind of logic that is specific to potentially multiple view models, if you're going to have multiple view models, then that logic should end up in the data layer, or basically the thing just below the view model. So in that case, in ours right now, it is the client data store. That's our data and logic layer, if you will, or our data model. That's the model part of the MVVM. But this is where, again, you don't have to follow these guidelines. They're simply guidelines for what works in every situation, and the point of them is obviously to allow you to swap out view models or data models without any, cross issues as such. Now, obviously, the view model can't work without the data model, and the data model can't work without the view model in a sense. They are in one way bound to each other, but the thing is they're not bound to specific implementations of each other is where you want to be. So the view model calls the interface of the client data store. It doesn't call the actual client data store. But kind of long story short here, that really the only thing you have to be aware of is putting any logic in the view model that isn't directly view model related. But you can, don't worry about doing that too much. You can do that. It's what works for you at the time, as I say. So let's just take a look back at this code and see what we're doing. So this is the view model, and we're updating the view model's properties fine. And we're using the view model to actually request information from a server, which I think is also correct and fine. It's nothing to do with data or logic, as in a sense that this is relative to what should happen in the UI, or what's happening in the application. So I believe this is the right place for the call. And then what we're doing is we are saying if it's successful, we want to store it in the data layer, and then have to do something else. So I feel that even though this has got logic in, I want this kind of logic to be in my view model, not in my client data store. To me, the view model is the big thing in your application now. It's basically the main logic of your application in my eyes. It's defining what your application is visually on the screen, as well as, in a sense, what actually happens. So this isn't visual, the loading of data from a website, but in theory, it's part of your application. So my personal preference is that unless the logic has something to do with the data, so if we got the data model here and then started saying if data model dot username equals angel6, then data model dot last name equals malpass or something, then obviously this is kind of a no-go. What you're clearly doing here is taking some data model, manipulating a data model, and then simply telling the data provider, if you will, to store it, whereas this logic would 100% be in the data model. So it should be fairly obvious to you. You should get like a code smell, and you should get a natural feeling that something's wrong. But ultimately, don't worry too much about where the logic happens between the view model and the data model. And as always, you can just update it in future. If we make mistakes, and if I make any mistakes here, and it turns out that actually I feel this logic should have been somewhere else, we'll just move it. There's no issue. So don't overthink it, basically. That's just, put your logic where it makes most sense for you right now. So we'll call this new API call, which is available, that we made in the last video. If it's successful, we want to get the data model committed to store, and then we want to call this update local cached values again, or rather update that's not update local cached values, that's update values from local cache. So that's loading it from there. So that is what we're doing there. So if we call from the server and it responds, we then store that new piece of information in here. The only thing is this is going to save every single time as well. So every single time we open the settings page, we're going to write to our local database with the new values, even if they haven't changed. So you can do a little bit of logic, and you can check the values. So I'll just put a note there to do, should we check if the values are different before saving? And I'm putting it as a to-do because it's a local file. It's writing a single entry to a database every so often. I'm not overly concerned. It keeps it fresh and up to date for now. But yeah, we certainly can just simply check if the data is different and save or not. But overall, I don't think that's majorly important right now. So I'm trying to stick on point. So we have the server running. We have this get user profile, which is the thing we should hit. So we'll put a breakpoint there. And we now have this. So let's just run this. This will also run on startup, because the application is going to call load async at the start. And the other thing is as well, load async, we may not have a user. So we may not want to call this if we, and this will also fail anyway because we don't have any info, but either way, we'll fix those two things in a minute. So this will hit this, run and forget, the remote server returns unauthorized. And now you'll also notice that that's killed that. So that's, again, we haven't done error handling yet, as I mentioned again in the last video, until we've got the localization done. So let's fix a few things. In fact, the 401 has crashed that. Why did that actually crash? Because we haven't awaited that on any UI, so that shouldn't have actually crashed it. Oh, of course it will still do, because we are awaiting it on there, so that's also not the same actually. Dot continue with the task, and we ignore it that way. You're gonna have the same issue. Okay, leave that for now. That's not awaiting it, but it's also gonna still crash. Yeah. I'll think on that one. Something's not quite right there, but that's not the point I'm trying to find here. Alright, getting a bit sidetracked here. Where were we? What were we up to? So, loading. We can load from local cache, but we don't want to fire this. If we have a token, so it means we're logged in. Or rather, if we don't have a token. So we don't have a token, so we are not logged in. So if client data store dot get, now I know we've got the login credentials already, but we'll get them once more so we can get access to the token right here. If it's equal to null, or we can do string dot is null or empty, the token, then we return. There's nothing else to do. And do nothing more. Because obviously this is you have to be logged in to get user details. So we won't do this now unless we're logged in, which we are. Then we'll call this. This has failed with a 401, as you saw, because we haven't passed the credentials and we haven't passed the token in. We should also actually get the token this way, because we're going to reuse it. Get the user token. And again, this is something we could have a cached value of. We could get the login credentials once and cache them in the application, but it's a local database, so the impact of getting that every time to make sure it's fresh is very small. So we'll do it this way, get the token. If the string is null or empty, the token, do nothing. Otherwise, we want to validate this request. So because I'm using the DNA framework post async, and if you've updated to 1073 or newer, it now supports, one, it supports being able to configure the requests manually, so you can get the request and add headers yourself. And two, it also supports a bearer token. So all we need to do to make this to work is to say, we could say the configure request, get the request, and take that breakpoint off. We do request.headers.add authorization, I believe it is, and then bearer, and then your token kind of thing, and add the headers that way. But I've done that as a helper already because we're using bearer tokens, so instead we can just pass in a bearer token. So now that should be an authorized request. So on load, we're logged in, it will find that, it will pass the token, and then if it's successful, things will happen. So if we run this, in fact, also that we don't really want that crashing just because it's 401. That's actually crashed because it's 401, which it shouldn't have. So I should definitely fix that, to be honest. So we run this. We're going to run it twice now, but it doesn't matter. We'll wait for the response. In fact, actually, the response hasn't happened. What's going on there? Or are we hitting... Oh, we hit a breakpoint in the background. So now we've gotten to here. The user, if we look at the claims, we have effectively the JWT token, and you can see we've got the name and the identifier. So we now should be able to extract a user from that. We're running twice. So we've got the Angel 6 user, and because we have the user, we're going to return the user's details. And we're going to hit this twice, as I mentioned. Successful is true. So if we've got the data, it's now going to save to the backend store. So our result is now saying that the first name on the server is actually test1. If we go to here and check what it is locally right now, it is Luke2. So because we've got the new data from the database, we're going to save and update the UI. You can also see here, because we haven't locked that call yet, we've modified 2 in one go. So we are going to have to lock this call in the very next video. So let's just restart that and let that run. It's going to run once. But yes, we will definitely lock this now in the next call to make sure we don't get that concurrency issue. We know we're hitting there fine now, so we don't have to wait for that. So in here, it should have already updated to test 1. So we now go back to the data and look, it's updated to test 1 down here. Again, it's going to be very hard to see. So if we forcefully update this to loop 2, what we should see is, and what we will see actually, if I pause on the server so that it doesn't happen straight away, and I close this down, it says test 1 now, the database has been updated to say loop 2. So if we pop up the settings, it should instantly say loop 2, which it does. And the server should have actually been hit, which it wasn't again for some reason. What's going on with that? Right, minimize and jump up. So it should have been hit. Token is null. Oh, we've lost the token. So because when we pulled the information back from the server, we don't return the token, we want to keep the existing token. So now we're going to have to log back in actually. So if we do that to there, re-add our known token. So this will be data model dot token equals the known token, and then save. So let's do this once more. This turned into quite a long-winded process, but this is what live debugging is. So load up. We now won't work. This is also what we need to do, is handle when this fails and log out, but we'll do that in another video. So we just log back in firstly. And of course we get another error. So now with this change, update values from local store. The store is first name, last name. Original text is first name, last name. What's wrong with that? Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Yes, we know, that's why we're using a nullable. So I'm guessing this you can't concatenate a null, basically. Great. So I mean, a real hackish way is to do that, which I don't like, so it should work. Let's try that. And now we're going to sign out and sign back in to make sure this works the same. So, yep, now it's calling the response because we are logged in. So let's just jump over to this, calls the response again, sign out him in to just check that error doesn't happen again. So, log in. Why are we getting object? Oh, name isn't set. That makes more sense. Again, Captain Obvious. The update values from local store is not, in fact, how has that not been set? Let me breakpoint that. Well, let's look at the logic. There's a settings view model. In fact, no, that shouldn't be possible. Settings view model is setting it to, oh, hang on, clear user data, we null this out. That's the issue. When we clear the user data, we null the properties. I don't think we really need to do that. We almost want to do the create the default. So the only thing that matters there is the original text, as opposed to nulling the whole thing. So instead, let's just do dot original text equals, and then the loading text for now. So that is again a thing that we need to refactor somewhere. Let's just put that in a private member for now. And then we'll just put a full comment on there. And that will be private. Now we can just chuck the loading text in at the start. And then when we want to clear the data, instead of nullifying, we just set it to this. So the password we do nothing with. So that's it, there's no more info in there. So that explains that issue. So let's restart once more. And on load, it is loading the user's profile. So let's just log out. Yes, load the profile. Log out and log in again. I'll have forgot why we're doing this by the time we get there. So we've logged in, that's all fine. It's now going to get the user profile. So we know the user profile's been hit at the right time. So we're at test 1. Right, so what were we testing? Oh, we were testing when we refetch from the server, it hasn't cleared the token. So now it's test 1. Let's restart and we should have stayed logged in because the token shouldn't have got wiped out this time. Oops, I've restarted the server, not the WPF application. Restart the WPF application and we should stay logged in. There we go. So that's finally up and running. Right, so let's test this. So let's test the first theory. So we update the name to look2 locally. Obviously you wouldn't do this, it's just to make sure the values do update properly. When we close and hide, it says test1 right now, which is the real value on the server. When we load, we'll update here, so it'll change from test1 to look2. So if we then do this, it will run, and if we can see that, which we can't because it hasn't shown yet, it'd say test1. And we can see that, I guess, by scrolling down and just hovering over name. Or rather, it says look2. So it's, look2 because it's updated from the database, which is look2, and that's correct. Then we're going to get the token and ask the server for a response. And if we breakpoint there, it asks the server for a response. Can we see the UI? Yes, we can see the UI says look2. That just keeps flicking off, but you can see it there, it says look2. As soon as we've got the response, it updates again, and it now says test1. So if we do that without any breakpoints, then you can see what happened. Well, in fact, we'd have to have a breakpoint so you can see the difference. So let's just do await task.delay again, just to show you, you can visibly see this happening then. So it won't now update the response for 2 seconds, so that we can just tweak the old value and make sure it updates. And the reason we're doing this is because you might edit your name on another, you might sign into the website or sign into the Android app or sign into another computer. So what you think is the local name might not be the local name. So it's keeping that in sync. So if we update it to look2, when we hide now and show, it should say look2, and then 2 seconds later, it pulls it in from what is live on the server. So it's keeping it up to date all the time. So that we can close down now. We're happy that it's altering the database and pulling in at the right time. And every time we open and close, it's updating the value. So I think it's quite a long video this time. There's quite a lot of debugging there again. But you know, I always say I do like to show you the raw videos sometimes, and obviously this one was totally unprepared and we just went for it. So what we have in there now is we have basically the settings page. As the application loads, it loads the settings. And then every time you open the settings page, it reloads the settings. And it does it from 2 places. First, it loads it from the actual local Sqlite database, our offline cache of presumably the right data. And then as soon as it's done that, it then fires off a request to the actual server and gets the live information. And when it comes back, it then stores that locally. So every single time you open the settings page, you are getting your most up-to-date server values, if you will. And then after this now, we want to then update those values. So that's what we'll do in the next video. We'll update these actual values to edit them in the client and send it to the server and get the response back, and again match the server's database with the client's offline cache. Any comments or questions about this video, as always, just leave them in the video, and I hope this one was useful.